Hey everybody, welcome back to CHIRO Coffee Chats. I'm Dr. Pete.
I'm Dr. Carla.
Today we're going to be talking about low back problems. It's a theme that we've been looking at this week on our Instagram page. And low back problems are really common. And it's interesting because we are seeing younger people. I'm seeing younger people. You're seeing younger people coming to your office with lower back problems, right? So, and in the post that we did this week, we talked about the concept of taking time to grow a problem, in this case, a lower back problem, and the concept of regrowing healthy tissues and healthy function, and both of those processes taking time. So could you, if we talk about the factors that relate to growing a low back problem, what do you think they would include?
I would say, especially in the younger population, sedentary lifestyle. So sitting all day, studying all day, everyone's transitioning to at-home work environments, so not proper sitting postures or desk setups. Another one is like repetitive motion disorder, so doing movements in improper ways, which can cause stress on the joints and vertebrae, therefore causing pain. And do you have any other ones?
Those are good ones. Athletics, which we're going to talk about, kids athletics, or even adults for that matter. You know, because, and I realized this a couple years ago, I started doing hot yoga. I miss it. I really miss it.
One day.
Yeah, we'll get back to it someday. But, and I wasn't thinking about the idea that, you know, when you're in the class, you're following the instructor. So the instructor is doing a cat-cow or is doing, you know, a forward bend, and you're just sort of keeping up with that, right? But you don't really know if you're doing, like when you're doing a cat-cow, for instance, if, you know, most of the movement's happening in your low back and none of the movement's happening in your thoracic spine, your upper back. So sort of reinforcement of faulty movement patterns that might start, for me, that probably started in childhood. For other people, it might as well. And you move where it's easy to move. Right. And consequently, where it's easy to move that area might get stressed out, and other areas that aren't moving might get stiff. And so that can certainly go along with low back problems, and that can be, you could be that way for years before, you know, the proverbial, oh, my back is out, and, you know, you end up like that. So I think that's an interesting angle to talk about.
Another thing is, you know, you want to get up, you want to get moving, but if you haven't been and you're starting off for the first time, you might not be aware of which areas are supposed to be moving in the right ways and which areas are supposed to not be moving. So being a lot more like body aware and having someone to point out those areas, being like, you know, tuck this in, push this down a little bit further, is great to kind of help prompt that movement awareness as well.
That is a great point, because I mean, again, you don't really know, I mean, unless you're an athlete and you've had a lot of, you know, a lot of the patients that come in that we see, they have, you know, pretty, I want to say, like poor body awareness.
Of
so
course.
we know this when we give them their exercises and we sort of teach them how to do it. And then, you know, you can ask them a month later, okay, show me this exercise, and you see it and you're like, oh, they're not really, they've kind of lost, you know, so we have to keep coaching them on how to, and that's part of the care that we do, is when we're adjusting people and working with people, you know, getting them to notice, like getting them to notice your body before it's in pain. Like, oh, I'm starting to get a little bit tight here, versus like I feel fine or nothing, and all of a sudden I have this like major pain. So there's some different things. So with a low back problem, all the things we just mentioned and more, it can there's changes that happen to tissues like discs, joints, ligaments, muscles, nerves. And in many cases, those changes are happening very slowly over years. Right. And so during that time, a person may have no symptoms. And then again, they might get a quick onset of symptoms. And then if they go to a chiropractor or another healthcare provider, particularly if they get imaging, you know, we might see things like degenerative disc problems. If they had an MRI, they might have a disc herniation. We might see calcification of ligaments of the spine. And I always make sure to tell the patients that realize that if you can see that on an x-ray, that didn't happen a week, like if your pain started a week ago, those degenerative changes would have been partly visible probably 2 and 5 and maybe even longer ago. So
always the response is, I was feeling perfectly healthy up until this. And it's always that cherry on top type of situation where there was a bunch of things that led up to it. Maybe they didn't necessarily cause pain, but then there'll be that final cherry on top moment where you go to plug in your curling iron or pick a toy off the ground and your back goes out. That wasn't the main event. That was just that tiny push over the edge that was building up for probably years.
That's what happened to me, plugging in the curling iron.
Oh yeah, of course.
I actually I should tell this.
But they're never good stories. It's always something, I was brushing my teeth, just something you just do.
I'll tell you my embarrassing story. I don't want to say it, but I'm going to say it. But and this is like, I'm grade 9, so a young person. And at that time before I started working out, so I was pretty sedentary. Yeah. So we walked to my friend's place for lunch, sat down on his couch. It was kind of like a old couch, and I sunk in and we were chatting. And then I went to get up and I was like, I was like the old man with like the seized up back, and I was like, I couldn't breathe. My muscles were spasming. Yep. It was crazy. And grade 9, and my friends were like, what's wrong with you, right? And I actually went to, I'm trying to remember what happened. I think I used his phone, called my mom, and she's like, there's a hospital like beside our high school. Right. So I went to the Emerge, saw the doctor, and he was like, okay, well, here's, muscle relaxers. Muscle relaxers. And so it was a few years of that before I, got to the bottom of it. But it can be like a meaningless event. But I now looking back, I know that my posture and body movement would have been unhealthy much from the start of my life that then led to that one day of the seized back. Yep. So what we're going to do now is we're going to show, I'm going to go over to our chiropractic tables and just show some little exam things that we look for. Some of these things you might almost kind of look at it yourself. You might be able to do at home and get an idea about if you have a back problem or if you're headed towards one with what we're going to show you. So let's take a look. So for low back problems, there's certain tests or spinal characteristics that we look for that we might see in low back problems, especially chronic ones. So with Dr. Carla, one thing we're going to look at is that we use as an assessment is the cat-cow or cat-camel movement test. So why don't you get into the tabletop position, Dr. Carla? So when we look at this, we're going to assess a couple things. First of all, we can look at the neutral spine posture. You could sort of at home do this yourself. You could set up your phone and get into the position, look at your neutral spine, and then see your spine during movement. And so if we just start with what we're looking for. So with Dr. Carla, neutral spine, she's pretty good. She's got a little curvature, which is called a thoracic kyphosis, and she has a little lumbar lordosis. So things are looking okay from the neutral spine perspective. So now we'll just try generally the cat. So pushing the spine up to the ceiling. So we'll have Dr. Carla do that, and we can see that she's pretty good. This direction is called flexion. So we can see her spine uniformly flexes pretty well from the upper back region through the mid and through the lower back. Come back to the neutral. If we wanted to, a more difficult test would be to do segmental motion. I'm not going to do it on this video, but that would be having the person move their spine, trying to move it into flexion a segment at a time, starting at the tailbone and then working through the lumbar spine. That requires a lot of control. A lot of people aren't going to be able to do that. Now we'll try the opposite direction, which is extension, so dropping the spine down towards the table. And when we look here with Dr. Carla, we can see that right about here, which is about L2, 3, there's almost a bit of a hinge. So she bends a lot here and not as much in through here and through here. Now, what that can mean is that that area could be subject to more stress or strain during things like a workout, a squat or a deadlift, which could set her up for an injury there. She hasn't had that, but that is something we would see, and that might be something that we want to work on, is getting some more uniform extension through her lumbar spine.
A lot of people, can you go back into the flexion posture? Yeah. A lot of people, a lot of new patients, when they come in with chronic low back pain and we do this part of their spine does not bend. I'll just flatten your lumbar spine if you can. It stays flat. So they have very little movement into flexion in the low back. Reason being, their low back is jammed together. The joints in the low back or in the entire spine are at the back part of the spine. And if they're tight, a person may not be able to flex their low back. Part of that might come from the fact that, can you come to sitting for a second and just turn angle a little bit? Show, like, when we're taught how to sit properly, like, kind of show what that looks like. Yeah, we've heard about putting an arch in the back. People will use like chairs with some supportive devices that push into the low back. The stretcher thing we were talking about that you can buy puts an arch in the low back. And then if you're going to do squats at the gym, this is the position. Right. You're having your low back in, right? Now, again, it's key to understand that there's not one good posture. So there are guidelines for posture, but of course the guidelines go along with the fact that your spine, which is made up of soft tissues and joints, it needs to move through its available ranges of motion every day. So we could say, well, Dr. Carla's showing good posture here, but if she sits like this for 6 or 8 hours,
it's gonna hurt.
It's going to start to tighten up, possibly like tighten up the joint capsules in the back, irritate the joints, irritate nerves, muscles start to get into spasm, and a cycle of tightness and inflammation and pain can develop. Again, could be very slow, might not happen it might take years to develop. But then when she comes in the office, we see that, oh, she's really not good. She really doesn't have good movement in her lower back, even though she's been trying to have good posture. And that's, we can see that in some of our setups when we're adjusting patients as well. So a couple things to look at. When you look at your cat-cow, if you video yourself, look at how much movement you have in flexion and extension. Look at if there's any hinge points in your spine, like kind of bent areas that move more than other areas, whether you have pain or you don't. And that can give a clue to where you may have problems or may be likely to develop problems in the future.